He said, well, would you like to give this to our club? And I said, certainly. So here we are. This is a little bit of radio history. If I can get to the next slide, I'll be a happy guy. It's not working. Oh, there we go. Maybe it just took a while. So 1902, radio history. Marconi had demonstrated practical communications across the Atlantic via radio. And people had been kind of experimenting with radio before that. And they could get it, you know, a couple of miles and you know, short distances comparatively. But when Marconi demonstrated this radio across the Atlantic, that really set a lot of things in motion, and kind of started everything going. Inventors, hackers, commercial, amateur enthusiasts started experimenting with this wireless telegraphy. Marconi, Tesla, Heinrich Hertz, Edison, and Hiram Percy Maxim were early experimenters with this new technology. The word radio didn't come into common use until 1906. Other terms that were used prior to that were primarily wireless telegraph, but that technology also applied to sending signals via electrostatic induction, electromagnetic induction, earth conduction, and liquid conduction. They were all referred to as wireless telegraph. Some other pre-radio terms were Hertzian waves, electric waves, and ether waves. In 1906, the British Post Office, in one of their operations manual, had the word radio as a service, and it kind of caught on from there, and people started using that term. The word comes from the Latin radius, meaning a ray, and also the spoke of a chariot wheel. So, you know, looking at the picture, you can kind of visualize why that may have been. American and British and other naval forces began installing radios on ships for communications between each other and between ships and land stations. Passenger ships started installing radio rooms to handle commercial telegrams for a fee. It was not an official ship function. The radio operators were allowed by their company to relay weather reports only if time permitted, but they were primarily there to make money. Private citizens began experimenting with this new technology. There were no regulations at all, so it meant there was a free-for-all. Just get on the air and start communicating. Amateur stations, and I put that in quotes, that meant non-professional at the time, frequently interfered, and often intentionally, with both commercial and military radio stations. And it wasn't just jamming, but amateurs sending false messages as a practical joke became very commonplace during those days. They would identify themselves as a military station or as another ship or something, sending to another ship and just sending the false messages. And this became kind of commonplace with non-professionals. Professional operators really looked with disdain at these non-professionals, as you can well imagine. A recent term had come into the English language from a British publication, ham-fisted or mutton-fisted or ham-handed. It meant clumsy or inferior. It really didn't have anything to do with radio or radio technique. But there's another story that professional telegraphers referred to each other's sending style as their fist, and they referred to poor or unskilled telegraphers as ham-fisted. This pejorative term evolved, and all unskilled or, quote, amateur operators were referred to as hams. There's a legendary story that one commercial operator was sending to another and said, "These damn hams are interfering." The message was overheard by amateur operators who started jokingly referring to each other as hams. So it's a great story. I don't mind sharing it with you, but it's legendary. So what we have going on is a new evolving industry. Commercial companies such as Marconi, Telefunken place radio operators on ships for the primary purpose of sending telegrams. Military use is beginning in earnest. And amateurs delight in sending false messages, thus interfering with military and commercial operators. So the stage is set. But then the ship went down. RMS Titanic disaster in April 1912 became the catalyst for significant changes in radio operations. RMS Titanic is on its maiden voyage on April 14th, 1912 from Southampton, England to New York. Its radio transmitter had been malfunctioning most of the day. There was a large backlog of messages, and the radio men began clearing the backlog once the transmitter was repaired. Another ship, the SS Californian, also on a night Atlantic crossing, encounters icebergs. Its captain orders an all stop until the morning, and he directs the radio man to signal icebergs. Californian starts sending a radio message to Titanic, but the Titanic radio operator is involved with transmitting passenger messages to Cape Race, Newfoundland. And the Titanic operator transmits, shut up, to the Californian and resumes commercial message traffic. The Californian radio operator secures the radio room for the night at 23:30 hours. 10 minutes later, Titanic struck an iceberg. SS Californian is estimated to be stopped less than 20 miles from the Titanic. Titanic radio operator begins CQD 25 minutes after striking the ice. And despite the Titanic's distress calls, the Californian remains unaware of the situation. RMS Titanic sinks at 2:20 a.m., 2 hours and 40 minutes after hitting the iceberg. There were 2,224 passengers on board, and over 1,500 perished. Radios weren't considered safety equipment at that time. They were operated by commercial radio companies for the purpose of sending telegrams. The new technology was not well understood by the commercial maritime industry, and the fledgling wireless industry was considered unreliable. Not all ships had radios, and many that did were part-time. Many company operators were forbidden to communicate with operators from other companies. There was no standard set of codes, no standard language, no standard equipment. No licensing, no rules, and governments had no authority. The Titanic inquiry found that rescue efforts were hampered due to a lack of uniform radio procedures, among many other things, but with respect to radio. It was believed that several hundred lives could have been saved if the Californian was on hand to rescue passengers from the doomed Titanic. There was an international radio conference scheduled for July in London, well before the Titanic disaster, but this conference crystallized the need to come up with a uniform set of radio standards. It standardized SOS as an international distress call. It provided for 24/7 radio station staffing under the direction of the ship's captain, not a private company. Licensing of stations by governments, unique call signs with prefix allocations, and any ship can send messages to any other ship or station. They standardized many codes, including Q codes that we still have in use today. Created a quiet period where ships were required to be silent. Maritime radio stations had to observe radio silence for the first 3 minutes of each hour and for the first 3 minutes following the bottom of the hour. And then they were also required to observe radio silence for the 3 minutes between 15 and 18 minutes past the top of each hour, and for the 3 minutes between 45 and 48 minutes past the top of the hour. Most ships, this is a ship radio room clock. And if you've never seen one before, this is marking the quiet periods. When you're in the green or the red periods, the radio room should be quiet and just listen to make sure there's no disasters and no ships needing help. The United States Radio Act, passed in 1912, adopted the London Accords. It determined grades of licenses, and they included quite a list: commercial, extra first, commercial second, commercial cargo, commercial temporary, experimental and instruction, amateur first, and amateur second. So 1912 is the first time that officially a class of license was referred to as amateur. There was a license exam. Said that the practical and theoretical examination shall consist of 7 comprehensive questions under the following headings and values. And this is right out of the law of 1912, the Radio Act. Adjustment of the apparatus, knowledge of its functioning, transmission and acoustic reception at a rate not less than 20 words per minute for commercial first grade, and 12 words per minute for second grade. knowledge of regulations, and the government has bound the operator to secrecy with regard to the correspondence, meaning they're sending private messages back and forth, and they really can't make them go public. And here's one of the most important things that happened. The department recognizes that radio communications offers a wholesome form of instructive recreation for amateurs. At the same time, its use for this purpose must observe strictly the rights of others to the uninterrupted use of apparatus for important public and commercial purposes. The department will not knowingly issue a license to an amateur who does not recognize and will not obey this principle. Applicant must be able to transmit and receive at a speed sufficient to enable him to recognize distress calls or the official keep out signals. Speed of at least 10 words per minute must be attained. Score of 75 is required to obtain a first class and 65 for a second class license. International treaty call signs were allocated amongst participating countries. The U.S. allocation was KDA through KDZ, all of the letter N and all of the letter W. At the next conference in 1927, all of K was given over to the U.S. So in the U.S., the usage of call signs was N for the Navy, K for commercial ships in the Atlantic, and W for ships in the Gulf and Pacific. Stations on land in the continental U.S. were the reverse of what was going on with maritime. K for the western U.S. and W for the eastern U.S. Amateur stations started with a number corresponding to a district and 2 letters. For example, Hiram Maxim got the call sign 1 Alpha Whiskey. With 9 districts and 2 letters, and there were some letter combinations that weren't allowed, the total number of available amateur radio licenses in the United States was 5,382. Looking at it today, that seemed a little short-sighted, but I guess the Commerce Department really didn't think that there was going to be that many amateurs. Voice over radio had been developed since 1900. Reginald Fessenden had developed a continuous wave amplitude modulation transmitter by using a spark gap with a 10 kHz interrupter. And this is believed to be the first time that voice was transmitted over radio. He sent the signal 1 mile, and these are the historic first words that were spoken. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is it snowing where you are, Mr. Thiessen? So probably not anything that goes down in history, but there you have it. 1912, Edwin Armstrong and Alexander Meissner invented the vacuum tube feedback oscillator. It produced continuous waves cheaply and could be modulated, creating an AM signal. A couple of years later, John Carson, who was a mathematician, discovered, and I say discovered because he didn't build anything, he mathematically proved single sideband, and he got it patented in December of 1915. 1913, the U.S. Navy radio station, November Alpha Alpha, began transmitting time and weather broadcasts from Arlington, Virginia. There's a picture of their towers, a 100 kilowatt spark transmitter, and there's the transmitter, and there's the front panel. Radio Arlington, as it was called, the U.S. Navy took the lead in helping to develop radio as a viable communications medium. Why the Navy? Well, telegraph wires were pretty useless for communicating with ships, number 1. And number 2, radio navigation. To determine a ship's location on the sea with no land in sight, you need 2 things: a sextant to be able to determine your latitude, and a chronometer to know what time it is, like a GMT, for example, where you left, and the difference between where you left and where you are. Problem is that chronometers historically tend to drift, even in those days, especially when it was on a moving ship. So there was always an error that could creep in, and the Navy figured, well, if they can transmit time signals all over the Atlantic and the Pacific, then ships would know exactly what time it is in Washington, D.C. or Arlington, Virginia, and they know what time it is where they are, based on the sun, so they can figure out their longitude. 1915, Radio Arlington put an experimental audio AM transmitter on the air, and by 1920 they were using a vacuum tube transmitter. U.S. entered World War I in 1917, and all amateur radio licenses were canceled. And while they were off the air, the U.S. Navy especially, but other commercial and military entities were putting a lot of pressure on the Commerce Department to not allow amateur radio back on the air. It was a good argument that they were making, that you could be interfering with military operations, and the Commerce Department was seriously considering it. Prominent hams, including Hiram Percy Maxim, lobbied the Commerce Department with counter-arguments, arguing that a vast army of civilian operators practiced in passing messages would be a ready reserve. And the Commerce Department bought into that argument, and amateur radio returned to the air in 1919. Radio developments continued. In 1918, Edwin Armstrong, again, invented the superheterodyne receiver. And then in 1922, he invented the super regenerative circuit. And in 1935, he invented frequency modulation. You want to read an interesting biography? This is a guy who was pretty smart, and he essentially invented, radio as we continue to use it today. By 1927, amateur call signs were treated the same as other transmitters and began using W and K prefixes. So Hiram Percy Maxim became W1AW. Meanwhile, commercial radio stations have been popping up all over the nation. And I'm sure you'll see very recognizable AM radio stations that came on the air in the 20s, including WJZ in New York, which subsequently moved to Baltimore. KOA in Denver came on the air in 24. Another real early station was KYW in Chicago. That prefix is currently in Philadelphia. And WWV, Washington, D.C., set up shop in 1919. They came on the air. The three-letter K and W call signs were also being assigned to ships at sea, and they soon ran out. So four-letter K and W calls became the norm. Still attempting to adhere to the KW assignment split, with K being the Atlantic ships and West Coast land, and W being the opposite. I started putting this presentation together because I was kind of wondering about these W and K anomalies. And so I did a little bit of research on why these anomalies exist. The original KW split line was actually a lot further west along the borders of New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. And that was primarily because the ships in the Atlantic and Gulf were going to have the same call sign, so they wanted the reverse in the continental United States. But the Commerce Department figured out, based on population, that they were probably going to run out of call signs on one side of the line, so they moved the line to essentially the Mississippi River. And when they did that, they stranded a bunch of call signs that had already been assigned. Stranded W's included this list. These are all in the western U.S., west of the Mississippi, and yet they have W call signs. Well, they were assigned before the line moved, so they were stranded. There's another anomaly where stations moved. They were in one city and they decided to move to another city that happened to be on the other side of the line, and they weren't required to change their call sign, so they just kept them. So you have the I moved my station over the line anomaly. Then it was the KDXX assignments in 1920 and 21. A block of assignments that had been reserved for ships was released for land use, and they were assigned all over the United States on both sides of the line. And I tried to dig up the why that happened, and I really couldn't find anything other than that's just what they did. KDKA Pittsburgh is the only station of that particular block remaining. And then there was the, hey, we'd really like this call sign. So somebody set up shop. They applied for a specific call sign, and it was granted, even though they weren't on the side of the line where that type of call sign would normally be assigned. But if they asked for it, they got it. And then there's a small number that, as much research as I've tried to figure out why, can't figure out why these call signs were assigned. KYW, as I mentioned earlier, was originally in Chicago, which is in W land, and it actually went somewhere else before it wound up in Philadelphia. So you got two powerhouse stations, KDKA and KYW, both in Pennsylvania, and Pittsburgh KQV is also. So they got a bunch of K stations there in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, amateur radio class of license evolved, and they added the amateur extra first grade in 1923. And in 1929, they added a class called unlimited radiophone privileges. 1933, the now Federal Radio Commission reorged amateur radio and started calling them Class A, B, and C. You had all privileges with Class A, including radiophone. Class B was the former first class, and Class C was the former second class. The U.S. was granted additional call sign prefixes in 1947, the AA through AL block. And in 1951, the FCC restructured and added new license classes and changed the letters to names. And we have now the more familiar novice technician, general. Then there was a conditional. It was the former Class C 5-year license, full privileges. The thing about this one is that you had to go to the FCC office to take your test, but if you couldn't get there, you could take the same test and you'd be granted a conditional license. And then the advanced, former Class A, and then the amateur extra. A new 5-year license, full privileges, required holding an advanced, general, or conditional for at least 2 years, plus 20 word per minute code and an additional written test. 1968, incentive licensing came out. They redistributed privileges as an incentive for holders of novice through general to upgrade in order to gain additional HF spectrum. 1987 saw the novice enhancement with novice voice on 10 meters and access to 220 megahertz. It also created exam elements 3A for tech and 3B for general. 1991 created the tech no code, and in 1994 it named the old tech as Tech Plus and was a 5-word per minute license. Amateur radio calls by this time had become standardized, with novice being 2x3 format, technician being 1x3, also general, advanced being 2x2, and extra being 1x2 or 2x1, which is the way it still is today. As far as CW goes, Samuel Morse invented this code to carry messages on his telegraph machine, which was patented in 1840, the CW code, Morse code. First intercity message was transmitted from Washington to Baltimore on May 24th, 1844. The message was, "What hath God wrought?" First thing transmitted in Morse code. Morse code was naturally used by early radio operators who were primarily former telegraph operators. The U.S. government mandated all radio operators, including amateur, demonstrate knowledge of Morse code so they would be able to help in an emergency, for example, an SOS being sent by a ship at sea. Technology advanced over the years with voice, data, and eventually digital radio techniques, including satellite. By the end of the 20th century, all ships had converted to modern technology, and CW was no longer in use. By 1995, the U.S. Coast Guard was the sole remaining government entity using Morse code. And on March 31st, 1995, all remaining Coast Guard HF stations, Chesapeake, Boston, Miami, New Orleans, San Francisco, Honolulu, and Kodiak, permanently shut down its Morse code operations with the final message: the chilling SOS signal will never again be received. We bid you 73. What hath God wrought? In 2003, the World Radio Conference eliminated Morse code as a requirement for amateur radio, leaving it up to individual administrations, such as FCC here in the US, to determine. In 2005, the FCC issued a notice of proposed rulemaking to eliminate Morse code. And in December of 2006, the FCC issued a report and order removing Morse code as a requirement for any class of license in the amateur service. So the CW era was December 13th, 1912 to December 15th, 2006, 94 years and 2 days. Telecommunications history, the word coming from the Greek prefix tele, meaning distant, and communicar, meaning to share, so sharing at a distance. Started off with pictographs and markers, which date back to prehistoric times. Drums, horns, and smoke were a method of communicating. Carrier pigeons were in use in Roman times. Beacons, beacon fires and beacon symbols were used in the 1300s. Optical towers and semaphore has been around since 1792. The telegraph, 1837. Telephone was invented in 1876, and radio in 1894. Broadcast radios was commonplace by the 1920s. These are just some of the services that are currently regulated by the FCC here in the United States. And there's many other services that are not regulated by the FCC, mostly government entities. Now, since the beginning of the turn of the 20th century, radio has become a ubiquitous and integral part of the human existence. Today, there are over 825,000 active licenses in the FCC's ULS database across all services. As amateur radio operators, we stand on the shoulders of the pioneers that I've discussed. We're the guardians of our noble service, and we continue to advance the art, science, and radio for the benefit of all. And with that, I thank you for your kind attention, and I'll turn it back to Ned. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. If you have any questions for Jeff, if you'd like to type it in the chat, that way we don't get so many people, and then I'll relay it and we can kind of answer for you. So, Jeff, I got a question for you. So you did this all on your own as far as researching and things like that?
Yeah.
Really great presentation. Thank you very much. As a newer ham myself, only been doing this about 3 years, this definitely brought a big insight as far as the history and how it all started and things like that. I do have a question from Ted. He goes, what books, I guess he's referring to what books did you use to research and read on getting this information?
Well, let's see. I've been putting this thing together for over a year. A lot of I found on the internet, fortunately, but made reference to books. I went and found the original 1912 congressional, the law, and I read through that thoroughly, time and time again, extracting a lot of information from that and kind of piecing it together how things work. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I will have to go and get back to you on that.
Yeah, if you could, and I'll post it out on our website and let people know. Another comment was a great presentation from Harlan. This is not related to the presentation, but since you are an ARL rep, maybe you can help answer this question for us. The question is, what is the status of the bill the ARL was trying to pass a few years ago regarding antennas and HOAs?
We have a legislative advocacy committee that is currently working with congressional staff, both on the Senate side and the House side. And we've redrafted a bill, and there's 3 versions of it. And we're trying to work through Congress right now. Actually, we're seeing some pretty positive response from staff. The thinking is that they want to attach it. They don't want to. It's really hard for an individual or a group to get a law passed through Congress. But if you attach it to something else that's going on, it makes it a little bit easier. So we're hoping to attach it to a funding bill that we think most people are going to be in support of. But we need to put the wording so that it doesn't really irritate anybody. We were really close last time. I delight in telling the story that it was blocked by one senator in Florida, and all it takes to get a bill to get something like that out is for somebody to say I object. because it's like,
Right.
it's called a unanimous consent kind of thing. Means nobody objects. And he raised his hand and he objected. And he lost his election by 20,000 votes, which happens to be the amateur radio population in Florida. So it's moving ahead. Good question.
Karma is a pain.
That's right.
With that also, is there anything as AR members or even non-members that can do to help this along? Is there anything we can do? Talk to our local congressman or whatever, or let them know, or what can we do to help maybe get this moved along and shuffled? Because it's been years, and let's face it, a lot of states now in the U.S. have HOAs, and especially here in Colorado, most of the communities out here are all HOAs. So it really affects us homeowners here on what we can do based on HOA rules and stuff. So is there anything we can do as members to help out? Is there anything on website or anything we can put in a petition or whatever to help out?
Yes, once we have legislation.
Okay.
Your representatives won't know anything about it until it hits the floor.
Gotcha.
They won't be able to look it up. They won't understand what you're talking about. And to say, to a congressperson, and you certainly can, I'm not saying you can't, that if any amateur radio bill comes up, I hope you support it. That's really not going to get us anywhere, because they may forget by the time the bill actually gets to the floor or in a committee where they actually need to vote on it.
Gotcha.
So the ARRL will let you know. If you're a member, you'll get an email from the ARRL that says, now's the time. Please contact your senator. Please contact your congressman. They'll tell you who your senator is, who your congressman is, how to get a hold of them via email or snail mail. So when that time comes, we'll rally the troops.
Outstanding. Thank you. Had a question here. When did the requirement to change your call sign when moving from one geographic area to another, i.e. N0 to N7?
I think that went away. I know it was gone by the 80s, so I'm thinking it probably went away in the 70s or 80s. That you didn't have to. I mean, you used to have to change your call sign. And I know my older brother was a ham, and he's 5 years older than me, and I grew up in 2-land, but he was licensed in 9-land, and he used to come home, and he always used to sign himself, WB9SJI Portable 2, because he kind of had to. That's what you did back and that would have been in the 60s. So in the 60s, it was still there, but I think by the time the 80s came around, it was gone. So in that time frame.
Okay, thank you. It says the early radio operators were sworn to secrecy to protect their traffic from being compromised. They were to keep secret all transmissions between two parties that were not related to. Good presentation. Thank you for your research and presentations. Another question, are there any ARRL resources for clubs that we can take advantage of?
Yes, there are. There's documentation on the website. If you just Google clubs in there, and you'll find out how to organize a club, how to do swap fests, how to do conventions and things of that nature. Each section has an ARRL affiliated club coordinator. Here in Colorado, it's Wayne Heinen, N0POH, and you can reach out to Wayne. And last time I was back in Newington, they were talking about, it all begins and ends with the clubs. And we need to reach out to the local communities and bring them into amateur radio. And it's kind of hard to do it from a building in Newington all over the country. So the clubs are key. The clubs are key to making this happen. And there has been a lot of discussions at headquarters about actually hiring an individual or retasking an individual to work specifically with clubs, trade information back and forth, what's working, what's not working. There are a lot of successful clubs around that are growing.
Oh, yes.
And that information needs to be shared with the clubs that aren't growing. We need to figure out what the magic is that gets people in the door and gets them to stay. There's a troubling statistic that people join the ARRL and many of them leave after a year. And the two biggest reasons were it went over my head, a lot of what you were talking about, and I wasn't made to feel welcome in my local community. So if we can change those two things, and we did by creating a new magazine called On the Air. I hope many of you have seen it, and it's targeted towards the new ham. And then the other thing that we need to do is make people feel welcome when they get newly licensed. We need to figure out how to do that. I've been guilty of it myself, had a tendency to be a little bit cliquish sometimes. We hang with the people we know, and we hang with the people that we enjoy the same things as we do. But my own personal experience was, I got licensed, I showed up at field day, and I'm standing there, not knowing anything. And this guy points at me and says, "Hey, come over here and help me put up this tower." And I'm like, "What?" And the next thing is, "Sit down here and log." And then the next thing is, okay, move over to this chair and start talking. I was really made to feel welcome, and I became a life member of the ARRL.
And I appreciate that, because I know at least our club, when I became the board president, that was one of my goals, is to make sure people feel welcome, new hams, because one of the feedback that we got from our trainers was, people would get their license, because I don't know if you're familiar with our training in Longmont for the Longmont Amateur Radio Club, but we have a hands-on training that we provide. And it's the technicians, like, I think it's 3 days over 2 weeks, something like that. Generals a little bit longer, and extra courses even longer. But it's hands-on. It goes through the questions. People actually get to experience prior to even getting on the radio. And I took the technician class with our instructors, who are excellent, Kat and Brian, AM0W and W0UM, and they, make it wonderful. And they did their part to get the people licensed and experienced and want to get on the air. But one of the feedbacks that I got from them was, well, they come to a club meeting and nobody says anything to them or whatever. So one of the things I did when I first got on, I got all of our board members, weren't super expensive. I made it myself, nameplates. So everybody had a badge on, or, a tag on, so you know who they were, things like that. And I've been trying to get people to interact with each other. And because, like you said, sometimes it is that I walk in the door and I don't even get a hello from anybody. And as the board president, I try to go around and say hi to everybody as much as I can. But I've also been told I like to hear myself talk. But that's not a bad thing in this situation, because you want to make people feel welcome. So I appreciate that, because there's and the other thing I'm also working on is a kind of a goal of mine, because I see this in other clubs, and I've talked to Joe out at NCART and a couple other people. I was trying to get the local Front Range area clubs together, all the presidents, before this whole pandemic thing. I was going to get us all together, go out and have coffee and say, hey, how can we help each other out? We don't want to take over your territory or anything like that, but how can we help each other out? Can we maybe do something jointly together? Can we maybe, because we've got people that are not only part of LARC, but they're also part of NCART, RM-HAM. There's people, I know that one guy I talked to last month refuses to join the club in Denver because they just treat him like total dirt. In fact, I sent him an app, and he might even join our club. He's 35, 40 miles away. So, we've got two people on that are still part of our club that are out of town. One's in Evergreen and one's in Minnesota that's on our call today. So that's one thing our club is trying to do also, is to make sure we let people feel welcome and get those people in there. And also, one of the things our trainers have done is we've had quite a few younger folks join as well. Trying to change that trend to get the mean age of ham radio down from 75, 70 down to more like 50, around my age. So that's another kind of goal of mine, is to try to do that as well. And I think, the ARL is doing some good stuff with that as well, to get youngsters involved. I've talked to the Girl Scout troop here, trying to get them involved. Working with another gentleman, possibly with, we're looking at radio astronomy and getting the two of those involved together. One thing I've learned, and what I do to get especially the millennials, as I mentioned the word internet when I talk in my discussion of ham radio. And as soon as I mention that, I've already got their attention, because that's what these millennials, that's the one key word all of them understand. You mentioned ham radio, they're thinking of a guy sitting there, with a pot belly laying backwards with a big mic and a 1500 watt amplifier sitting there blasting all over the world. That's what a lot of them picture. So I try to bring that back to reality of what really it is. A lot of times I'm on my HTs at 5 watts. I don't have a 1500 watt with a 13 element Yagi on a tower. It just ain't gonna happen. I'm in an HOA. But things like that kind of get them involved as well. And I think things like D-Star, DMR, Fusion, some of the digital modes have helped with that a little bit. Even the digital FT8 and those modes as well, I think, has got people interested in that kind of stuff. And kids love SSTV. I mean, that's one thing I talk to them about. Goes, guess what, kids? This is what they were doing back in the 50s, and we're still doing it today. This is what the first moon missions did. we'll send pictures back over SSTV. ISS does it every so often, things like that. So so I thank you for that feedback and kind of give you some what we're doing as a club as well to try to expand membership and give back to the community and get people involved. So I'm a very hands-on type of person. I'm trying to get more events together for a club as well. We're definitely trying to keep our ARL membership up, so we're still accredited with ARL, because I know that some clubs have problems with that as well.
Right.
When you got a $20, $25 fee and then a $50 a year fee and things like that, some hams are like, well, wait a minute. But again, to me, I'll admit that I was wrong as well. I should have joined 3 years ago. I just joined this year, so I'm now officially a member of ARL. So, and I did get on the Air magazine, which, by the way, I must say, they did an excellent job. That thing is it's crisp, easy to read. I mean, it's got nice pictures in it. I got my first copy earlier this week. I was looking through it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And I plan on sharing it. And let's say, hey, you get this, I think is it every quarter for on the air, or is it every 2 months?
Every 2 months.
Every 2 months. Say, hey, join and you'll get one every 2 months, things like that. So, yeah, and I know, like I said, the hobby itself has been dwindling over the last couple of years, but again, propagation is starting to come back up as well. New solar cycle starting, so hopefully we'll get people, more and more people involved. And in the interim, I've also been trying to start a little, more satellite communications. There are several FM transponder satellites up there that cross near Colorado multiple times a day.
Yep.
I picked up SO50 the other day with just a rubber ducky type antenna. I didn't transmit, I was listening, but you can do it. The ISS especially you can do as well. So I think it's great. And speaking of the ISS, I know the ARL kind of separated that into two separate organizations. With the ARISS organization is now separate for the U.S.
Actually, that's something that's different. That's AMSAT you're thinking.
Oh, it's AMSAT. Okay.
AMSAT, ARIS program used to run under AMSAT.
Okay.
Amateur Radio Satellite Corporation. And ARIS decided that they were going to kick themselves free. So they are now an independent organization. The relationship between the ARRL and ARIS remains exactly the same.
Okay, it's still the same. Good. That's what I wanted to find out. All right. Thank you. Anybody else have any more questions? I didn't see anything else pop up. Do you have anything for us? I know, how long have you been in this role now for Colorado as far as your new role?
Let's see here. October, what is this? This is 2020. So I think it was 2018. I'll go back and look.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was October of 2018 or October of 2017. I think it was 2018. One or the other that I started. And I was vice director before that.
Right. So, and some people may not know, can you give a little background of how you got involved with that, or how people can maybe get involved with that if they want to get into more of the, I guess, I don't want to say political side of, but it's kind of the political side of running our hobby. Sure. and nonprofit and organizations. Sure.
And I do have another presentation that's all about the ARRL.
Okay.
But when I was first invited, it was talking about the history kind of thing. So that was
right.
The presentation I had for you tonight.
I appreciate that.
That is all about the ARRL, and I'll be happy to come back at some future time and do it at length. But basically, the ARRL is a nonprofit corporation. It's got 160 some odd thousand members. It is divided into 15 geographic divisions, and a director and a vice director is appointed for each of those divisions, and that is the board of directors of the ARRL.
Okay.
We are the policymakers for this 160,000 member corporation, and it is a corporation. I mean, it has to run like a business. So, you got to have your finances in order. We've got products that sell. The only difference is that nobody makes any money. Now there are paid employees. There's 87 paid employees and about 10 contractors, I think, that work at headquarters and a very small staff in Washington, D.C. And I think that's the only locations where we have paid employees, but everybody else is volunteer. All the directors, vice directors are volunteers, and the directors are responsible for policy. The operations arm of the ARRL is the field organization. There are 71 sections, and Colorado is one of those sections. So that's where the rubber meets the road as far as membership is concerned, because that's where all the products and services, that's where, you got a section manager, you got your Aries group, you've got your club coordinator, and there's all sorts of volunteer positions that are available at the section level. We have a brand new section manager, Robert Wareham, just took over for Jack, who took over for me. And Jack is moving out of state, and we're sorry to see him go.
Yes, we are.
My last words to him were, have fun in the humidity and the mosquitoes. He's a good friend and has been a good friend for many, many years. Sorry to see him have to step down, but he's doing what's right for him in his life. And he's going to go be close to family, and I wish him well. And Jack and I will be in touch. Yeah. So stepping into his shoes is Robert Wareham, who had been our section emergency coordinator. He was also vice director, by the way, of the division. At the same time, he held both jobs. So he's the new section manager, and he has available all kinds of appointments, depending on what it is you want to do: public information, amateur radio emergency service, technical support. I mean, we always need a cadre of technical specialists who help clubs, who put on presentations for clubs, who help track down interference issues and things of that nature. This is all operations, and this is all done at the local level here in Colorado, within the section. So that's the operations arm, and then the policy-making arm is, if you want to get involved with the policy-making arm, every 3 years, every director has to stand for re-election. And if you don't like what I'm doing, run against me. If membership in the 4 sections, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, feel that somebody else can do a better job, they will elect somebody else. Yes. I ran unopposed my last election, which started in 2020. So I'll be for 2020, 21, and 22, and then I'll be up for election again. And it's the same thing with the vice director. Section manager has to get elected every 2 years, and they have to run for election. In Colorado, there has not been a contested election for section manager in 25 years at least, if not longer, because the section manager before me was section manager for 10 years and he never was opposed. And it's a great job. It's a great job if you love going around the state and going to different clubs and talking to people and getting feedback and finding out what's on their mind. And I do. I love that. What's one of my favorite things to do is just to interact with people. If I'm at a swap fest, I usually can't get 10 feet down the aisle before somebody else has put the arm on me and wants to talk to me about something. I love it. I just absolutely love it. It's great because this is how I figure out when I'm sitting in the boardroom, what do I need to do to support and serve my members, back here where the rubber meets the road.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Jeff. I appreciate it, because I know a lot of people probably don't know how they can get more involved if they want to and things like that. I mean, ARL is a pretty big nonprofit organization. It's, through the United States. I'm also part of another nonprofit organization myself that I'm also board president on, and I'm supposed to have stepped down, but unfortunately nobody's stepped up to take the position yet, so I'm still doing it. But yeah, it definitely is, like a lot of clubs and that, if you don't, a lot of times you're not going to run opposed. I mean, unless it's a club that, has a lot of internal stuff and people have a lot of, or don't get along, sometimes you'll get opposed, but most of the time it's, if you want the position, it's yours type thing. Yeah. But it's good to hear that, there's opportunities for people to get more involved at a national level if they want to. As far as that, I'm assuming the only requirement really is to be a dues paid up to date ARL member?
That's correct. Okay. The only appointment position in the field position that doesn't require you to be an ARRL member is assistant emergency coordinator.
Okay.
To participate in Aries, you do not need to be a club member.
Right.
Or a club member, a league member.
Sure.
The rules say no club or organizational affiliation is required to participate in the Aries program. That's the official language. So
Right.
you don't have to be required to join to be an Aries member. To be the EC, that's a different story.
Right. Well, if they ever come up with that position to maybe, if it paid enough, I might consider giving up my job to do that, but I doubt it's going to pay as much as I'm making. So,
And you want to move to Connecticut? Is that what you're saying?
no, not at all. I had a good friend that just moved from Connecticut back to Dallas. So, I kind of like it out here in Colorado. I've been out here about 10 years. I came from Chicago area. So I think this is where I'm going to stay for quite a while.
I joke about it, and those of us from west of the Mississippi, and especially the Pacific Northwest, and when we go back to Newington, we joke about it a lot.
Yeah.
About you East Coast guys, and you're clueless. You don't know what goes on in the rest of the country.
I used to work for IBM, so I dealt with a lot of East Coast people. So.
Well, I was born and raised on the East Coast. So
there's nothing wrong with that. I was born and raised in the Midwest, so. Some people call me a redneck. What can I say? But I like to have fun, and I can cook pretty good. So, all right. Does anybody else have any more questions, comments, concerns? Our club, ARL, anything that Jeff could maybe help answer? I could answer potentially, or one of the board members need to answer. Nothing's popping up, Jeff. You did a great job. Well,
thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. You guys are doing great stuff up there in Longmont. I'm only down here in Westminster.
Right.
I'm at the LARC Fest every year for years and years and years and years. I've been coming in. I never miss it, except 2020, like everything else.
Yeah. I still got all the door prizes are sitting up here in my ham shack. So, and tickets I have printed and everything else. So we actually had, just so you know, and it sounds like you go to pretty much all the ham fests in the Rocky Mountain region. One of the things I noticed at Ham Fest, and one of the things we were trying to do this year, is we're missing certain demographics coming to the Ham Fest. A lot of the Ham Fest is 12 and under, free, things like that. Our committee this year decided we were going to do 16 and under free, so we could kind of get the teenagers involved. We were going to have a hands-on station. We were actually going to take we got permission from the fairgrounds. I think we could have gone up 75 feet or 100 feet at the most. We were going to take a helium balloon and do a long wire and get on the air station and have it manned. We were going to do like SSTV within the building, so people, hey mom, dad, let me have your radio on your phone, and decode it while they're walking down, things like that. So we were trying to get some hands-on stuff to get more kids involved in the hobby. And I'm kind of a little sad that we weren't able to pull it off this year, but hopefully we'll make it better next year. So definitely come out and check it out. And hopefully, my goal is to try to lead the way, and maybe the way Hamfests are done, because I think that's one thing that we are missing at Hamfest is it needs to be more than people selling stuff out of their basements.
Right.
We need more hands-on, because people need to know how to use the stuff when they get it. So that's one thing we try to do. I was going to have a satellite station set up, so maybe we could get lucky and do a satellite thing as well. So I got lucky one time, last year I think it was, we were at a Boy Scout training session for ham radio, and we were fortunate enough that the ISS was going over, that we got a slow scan TV out of an HT, and I took my mobile, slapped it on a metal stainless steel piece of material that I have, put it on there, and we got us a picture from the ISS. And talking about the Boy Scouts' eyes just lighting up. It was just, it just happened to be the right time and things like that. And they were actually transmitting. So it was a lot of fun and things like that.
I have a couple of days that I remember vividly that are some of my favorite days in ham radio. And once was when I lived down in the Springs. I was a merit badge counselor for radio. And a young scout and his dad came over to the shack. And I just happened to have the HF radio turned on, and there was a LU station, Argentina, just on the air. There's no contest. There was no contest going on or anything. Just handing out contacts. It was 20 meters. Conditions were great, and I could hear stations in California. I could hear stations in Florida. I could hear stations in New York, and this LU station's just handing out contacts, and he's got a pile up on him, and people are blah, 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 blah. And I've got the volume. You can hear it, but I've got the volume down on the radio, and I'm talking to the scout. about the Radio Shack and the antenna. And I got my map, azimuthal map up there so we can see the world, and talking about different things. And he says, points to the radio. He says, what is going on? So I explained. He's just handing out contacts. That's a call sign. Here's that guy's in California. That guy's in Texas. That guy's in Florida. And this guy's down here in Argentina. And I'm pointing to the map. He's in Argentina. He said, that guy that's talking right now is in Argentina? I said, yeah. Signal's going up. It's bouncing off the air. It's coming back down again, bouncing off the ionosphere and coming back down to Earth. And he's like, you can talk to that guy from here? And I said, yeah, probably. He says, here's my call sign, and I'm going to say it. I'll speak it into the microphone. If you hear it coming back, he heard me. So I waited till the guy, yelled out a QRZ. I threw my call out. He came right back to me. And this kid's eyes and his face and his jaw, I knew, anybody who's ever taught in front of a class and you see, the spark in somebody's eyes when they get it. And this kid got it. I mean, I had touched this young man, and in a millisecond, all the talks about the internet is going to kill ham radio, and we can't compete with everything else that the kids are doing with their PlayStations and their cell phones and everything else. We can't compete. We can't compete. In a millisecond, that went through my head, and it went, it's crap. It's crap. It only wins if we let it win. Okay. So I know that these kids, even though they're saturated with the PlayStation and their cell phones and social media, you could still touch their mind and you could still spark the imagination. And that's what we need to do.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah. And that's one thing I know, as a ham myself, I'm trying to do as well. I have one other question that popped up. Have you seen anything new at other ham fests that help bring people in and keep them coming back?
That's a fantastic question. I've seen people try things. I don't know necessarily that they've been successful. I see ham fests that are doing, it's not just going to be radios, it's going to be like a computer show. So it's ham radio and computers. So hopefully you'll draw that in. I've seen ham fests that have something that's going to attract the wives. Whether it's food or clothing or something else going on, knitting, crafts, things of that nature. So, hams, bring your significant others. And, again, I'm stereotyping that most hams are guys, and that this is something that would be attractive. I don't know that they're being enormously successful, but these are the kinds of things that I'm seeing people try. Just, spice it up. Forums, again, hit and miss. Sometimes you have good forums, and that's what attracts people. They want to learn about something. We have our convention here in Colorado every 4 years. It's nothing but forums. And we sell out and people show up, and we got packed rooms, and people give, great kudos to the stuff that they're learning. So you might want to think about putting on a presentation. I know at Rocky Mountain Ham Radio, we talk about DMR, and we had a little forum about DMR and about the Rocky Mountain Ham Network and how it works. And we had, we have a good crowd, and we're trying to do more of that. That might be an appropriate way. I tried to do a kit building thing once, and it didn't work. So.
And I appreciate that. We actually used to have an arts and crafts side, and they bailed on us this year. So I kind of had to pull some stuff out of the air. I actually had Dave Kessler was going to come over and do a forum for us, since he's got so many followers, and he actually was a member of LARC many, many years ago. He lived in the Longmont area. So he was pleased to come out and actually do a forum for us. And I know everybody who watches his videos on YouTube are just like, okay, I can learn from this. This is understandable, and it's not over my head. So he was going to come out. I contacted, I forget her name, the space weather lady as well, to try to get her to come out and do a forum, or even do it virtually. Of course, she never got back to me a couple of times, but we never finished communicating. She never committed. But, I was trying to get some big names that people might know to draw people as well.
And we do have folks, across the section that are really brilliant on particular topics, and they're happy to travel and, and come and talk about things. And so, maybe we need to set up a speakers bureau or something like that.
Yeah, that might be a great idea. And say, okay, if you want to be a speaker, you know, and then maybe approach the clubs and say, hey, we have a speaker, a group of speakers who wants them. I mean, we've had James up at NCART has come and talked about soda. Did a really good presentation on that. Him and I forget the other gentleman's name that was with him. But I mean, they basically a lot of people afterwards said, hey, I want to go try this.
Yeah.
Let me go, you know, get a summit going. So yeah, we've had some good speakers. I mean, our club, that's one thing I'm proud of our club is we've had some really, even if we've had to pull stuff out last minute, it's been stuff that's been interesting and try to keep the club involved.
And now that you're doing this, you can draw from all over the nation.
Exactly. I'm thinking about maybe adding this on top of in person potentially as well to get more people involved. So that's one thing I'm going to look at next to see what either I can get a probably Zoom. Through my company, I have a Zoom ID that's good for, I think it's 300 people.
Yeah.
Or 1,000 people. 300,000, I forget. I think it's 1,000 people. So, and I've already mentioned multiple times going, hey, can I use it for personal use? Because we're not tracking. I'm like, okay. So we might have, you know, a free corporate license to use it currently. So, and try to do Zoom next time because WebEx is killing their free unlimited after July 1st for, you know, for free. So we're looking at different ways to keep people involved and go from there. But I don't see any other questions. So Jeff, I want to say thank you very much for joining us. Later this year, if your calendar is free, let me know and you can come talk about ARL. I would appreciate that. I think a whole presentation would be nice to have. Are you doing anything in the October timeframe?
Not that I'm aware of.
You want to? Can we put you down on our calendar?
Pencil me in, and I'll do the same.
Because the reason I mentioned October is that's our voting as well for our election. So I think it would fit really nice. You know, hey, you know, ARL's got some positions as well. You can expand beyond just LARC and hit something bigger or potentially other clubs or whatever. So I think that would be a good time frame, and we'll put you in for doing that.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's been great. And I appreciate the feedback. Hope everybody enjoyed, and have a great field day. Stay safe, and 73, take care.
73, Jeff, thank you very much. And everybody else, 73 as well. And thank you for joining. And again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please let me know. Good night, everyone.